Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Today I have the wonderful Bonebridger and John Automates, and we're going to do a deep dive into Killers of the Flower Moon, the new Martin Scorsese film that came out a few weeks ago in theaters. It will be arriving hopefully December 4th on Apple TV Plus. That is kind of the date that has been thrown around, but they do potentially have the option to extend that so to make the premiere a little bit later. But moving forward, we've been really anxious to discuss this movie. I have been especially. I wanted to just briefly, I think if we talk about some of the performances first and the characters, and then move into other things of the production and just the overall aspects of the film, I'd love to do that. I want to start with Leo's character, Ernest Burkhart, because I think there are some criticisms that you could have done the film with more of Molly's perspective, and I understand that. I personally feel that it was intentional to do that because of everyone likes Leonardo DiCaprio in his films, and he's very charismatic, and so it is kind of like a questioning the audience of how complicit you are, how many excuses are you going to give this guy to continue doing the heinous and atrocious things that he's doing throughout the movie. What did you guys think of Leo's performance in this?
First of all, I thought we were talking about SpongeBob today, so I'm completely lost. But on a second note, I love it from the perspective, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, one of you might know better, but Leo wanted to play this character, which is originally like there was a thought where he might play, a separate character that would be more likable, I would say. I love that he wants to play characters like this because big stars don't like playing characters like this unless you're named Joaquin Phoenix and you'll play anyone because you're just like that good of an actor. I really liked it from a story perspective because it's more interesting. I hate to say that. And it is a true story based on true story, all this. And I want to see the side of humanity that is bizarre to me, that I have I can't frame of reference anything like this. It's outside of my worldview, but I know it's real. John, what did you think? That's just my initial,
I think it was fine and good to have it from Leo's perspective, or more so Ernest's perspective. To be able to grapple with what we are supposed to do and versus what you think you should do and the decision making that comes along the way. There's a lot of parts in this movie which kind of have you going, would I do that? Or what would you do? Like, the questioning. And I don't know if you can have that same kind of questioning if you had it from Molly's perspective of Lily Gladstone. I don't know if that would have worked the same way. And I don't think this is a Titanic situation, if you will, for comparison's sake, of where, you could tell it from one side, but kind of more show Leo's cat. I don't know if it would have worked the same way. I think how they did it was actually pretty good.
Yeah, I agree. It would have almost been too easy to get the audience to sympathize, I feel like, with the Osage people. Not that it would be difficult, obviously, because of what you're going to view, but I think it's a lot more challenging filmmaking wise and storytelling wise. So I agree with you there. And yes, Bonebridger, you're right. Leo was supposed to play the Jesse Plemons character. The movie was supposed to be much more FBI focused. And then they went a totally different route, and I really appreciated that. And then moving to Robert De Niro's character, William Hale. I feel like in the past 10 years, maybe not 10 years, maybe 5, maybe I'm being a little harsh. De Niro is obviously one of the best actors of all time, but I feel like he's been kind of asleep in a lot of roles, not really given the most challenges. And I personally, I know some people love The Irishman. I know quite a few people that do. It was really hard for me to get through. And I felt completely the opposite with this one. I felt this time like De Niro was so alive and present and just really wanted to just soak in this horrible character, because he comes off, in the beginning of the movie of like the advocate for the Osage people. He's their friend, their confidant. He has their best interests at heart. And even like those opening conversations that he has with Ernest, it's almost like that mentor-ish type of personality. And then his slimy ways kind of just keep coming through through, and the dialogue that comes out of his mouth starts to just be creepy and gross. So how did you feel about De Niro's performance?
I'm
He's better
with you.
here.
Yeah, he's better. And
Yeah.
I think that like his role in Joker was really good. His role in this was really good. I think The Irishman, I don't like that film, to be honest. Like, I'm not gonna sit here and say it's like a bad film, but it feels like it was made at the wrong time. The de-aging, okay, sure. I mean, I love Joe Pesci. I mean, I can't get enough of Joe Pesci in roles like that. But I agree. Maybe it's the complicated nature of maybe manipulation that I love to see from De Niro, and he can do that where it's kind of like a reflection of his life, I'd say a little bit. Like he can do roles that are so like even his role as the TV host and Joker. He's not a bad guy, but you still don't like him. Like, and he doesn't like something bad happens. This is like the personification of a really good role where he could kind of shine. I don't know. I would say it's De Niro's best role in a long time, like a very long time.
Yeah, he's better here than he is in The Irishman. Like there's no question. In The Irishman, there's so many things about that movie where it's just like, yeah, this is the kind of character you almost expect. Whereas here, it's like this is a character that you know he's bad from the start. Like there's no like, oh, unsure or anything like that. You know he's bad from the start. You don't know how he's going to be bad from the start.
Yeah.
Because there's like different ways that he decides to like almost kind of like he pinpoints things, right? He'll pinpoint something and then he'll kind of just little by little. And that's where Ernest's thing becomes so important, because it's like he realizes that he has an opportunity, but he needs Ernest for it. And so now he's just like poking and prodding, and that slow burn of turning and manipulating. It's just better work. And even with the Joker, like the Joker was a light version of what we got here, where in the Joker, it's like he's turning things back on Arthur in the Joker to make it seem like he's the bad guy, and Arthur kind of at the end kind of makes it seem like, no, actually you're the one doing it, right? And it's one of those. Whereas here it's like he is of the belief that he is right while still kind of knowing that he's wrong at the same time. It's all of that all in one. And I think that he deserves a nomination, in my opinion, for this role.
Yeah, I think it's definitely well deserved. I don't remember the last time he's been nominated. I think it's been quite a while. So if he was going to get one in his super elder years, this would be definitely the film for that. And then of course, the heartbeat of the film, Lily Gladstone as Molly. Her stoicism, I mean, everything is in her eyes. She doesn't overdo it. She's so natural and like in control, but not, as she's in control of what she can control. But, when things start to get so out of control, there's really no helping her, especially because she's being poisoned. So I love how she kind of always comes across like she knows way more than people think. And I do think, she did have, I think that character does have these curiosities, these feelings towards Ernest in the beginning of the movie. I know I in the real story, I believe Ernest is actually only 19. And I believe De Niro, it was his character's like 40, which I don't mind that they changed the ages just because of those actors are fine doing that. But yeah, it was this like fun, charismatic guy that she did have feelings for. And like, I think she said it perfectly when they're like, oh, well, he just wants your money. And she's like, well, they all want our money. You know what I mean? But like, he wants to settle down and I want to settle down with him essentially. And then she sees the horrors continue to happen throughout the movie. And she's kind of, she is paralyzed throughout the majority of that. What do you guys think about Lily Gladstone?
Great casting. It was painful for me because, you watch this movie and then I come home and I have to edit more footage for the Marvels movie coming out. And you don't recognize how bad acting is until you see someone that can act without dialogue. I hate to say it made me like infuriated watching a lot of different Marvel footage because I'm like, it's true. It's what Robert Downey Jr. said. He was worried about the acting because they don't act like this. they don't get the time to act like this. They don't get the slow pace, the reactions. They're not allowed to act in environments like this. I think she's a necessary kind of like tone setter too, because this movie's not feel good. I don't think I would watch this movie twice for fun. I might watch it again for like a certain reason, but I would never watch this because it's not going to make you feel great, but it's going to stick with you. And her acting is definitely solid. I think you mentioned before she does qualify for certain run times. Is it supporting or best actress? Like
she's actually going to
actress?
do best actress, which I think she'll have a harder time winning, but I think it's just more of the importance of the first time a native is being nominated in that position. I think that means more to her than winning. So
now they did move the other movie though. It was Emma Stone's movie got moved to next year, beginning of next year. I believe that movie got pushed, unless I'm wrong.
Oh my goodness. I did not
3-month delay.
That.
So her competition may have changed drastically. Either way, I think her odds are better than I thought they were. But going into this, I didn't give her much odds. I still think that if Emily Blunt's I don't know, is she supporting for Oppenheimer?
I thought Emily was going to be, I thought Emily was going to be best actress, but she's actually going to be in the best supporting.
So Gladstone needs to be in the lead. Because I think Emily Blunt wins that without even a blink for supporting if she's in there. But that's just my take.
Right. How about you, John?
Yeah, it's okay. So my one kind of criticism is, and this is why it's like, there's a lot of people who wanted it to be through her eyes. She's not in it enough for it to be through her eyes. Now that could have been because of the changes and things like that. And I know it's a 3-hour movie, so it's not to say like she's not in it, but there are long periods of time where she is not in it. And I think that's where some of the criticism starts to come from, because you could make the case that the Osage tribe is in some ways a little bit underwritten, just because the focus then kind of shifts a little bit more with like FBI and things along those lines. Oklahoma's a weird place. I mean, you have the Osage tribe, you have the Tulsa race massacre. Oklahoma does not have a great history. People like to point to Texas and Florida and Alabama, and it's like, no, Oklahoma is kind of a wild place. And so it makes it seem that way and kind of showcases how bad it is throughout the film. But there are certain parts where you go, you could see where she could have been given either a little bit more time, or certain things could have been fleshed out with her, and especially with her and her reactions to her family and vice versa. But otherwise, she is really, really good. It's a wonder if she will win or not. I don't know if she would, but I think she could have a really good chance because she is that good. And the gravitas of just being able to, like Roman just said, act with your eyes, act with like your mannerisms rather than like having to say something each time, it does showcase the difference. And I'm glad like movies like this in particular, and even movies with like Oppenheimer and things like that, and potentially Napoleon, we just get to see a different level. And this is one of those where it's like, this is a different level of acting, period.
Yeah, I am so on board with both of you with what you said, and she definitely left such a huge presence on the screen, and you definitely missed her when she was gone. I will tell you that. You could look at it as being kind of doing that on purpose, to kind of feel the devastation of the deaths. But I don't necessarily think that that's the case, but that could be a potential theory on that. But right. I agree with you. I could have had more of her in the film. I want to just jump real quick to the cinematography. Robert, I believe his name is Robert Prieto, is having quite the year, because the other film that he did this year for the cinematography was Barbie. So he clearly is not going anywhere with his career. I just wanted to point out that I really loved the fact that when it was showcasing the Osage people in the community without any white people there, the colors were like much more vibrant and natural. And then when it does focus on everyone else, all the integration or just scenes with the white men, it is much more sepia toned and desaturated, and I loved showing that contrast. As well as a shot that I also loved in a moment was when Molly's mother dies, because we've seen so much horror, and when Molly's Molly's mom dies peacefully, and she envisions like these two family members of her taking her off into their version of heaven. I just thought that was so beautiful, and I think that Scorsese really took a lot of risks, more than he normally does, with the storytelling and working with his DP. What did you guys think about the overall look and tones and things that they did directing wise and cinematography wise?
I think that this is where I hit kind of a weird spot for myself in the movie. The visuals are great. The colors are great. The tone is great. The pacing, in my opinion, hurts all that too much. Like, I would almost argue that the editing hurt the movie, where the movie was like beautiful in so many ways. The pacing didn't work at some places. And I hate to say this because it's not like I inherently don't like movies that are 3 hours long. This movie was too long. I don't know. I'm not even saying I would know where to cut it, but like, you had all this beautiful stuff and you had these things, and it didn't move from that imagery. Like, so what you just described, the way it moved, it just didn't feel like it kept moving at that same pace where you could move through these heavy things were happening that were very heavy, but the pacing in it just didn't work for me. And I think it hurt some of the things like the cinematography in a way. Whereas I would say like the cinematography in Barbie with the pacing, I mean, clearly worked out really well. But yeah, there was just something off. It was almost one of those things where, like, this is where I felt bad criticizing it, because I'm not saying this is a bad movie in any shape or form, but something is wrong with the pacing and the length. I don't know if I know what that is, though.
Rodrigo Pietro is the same guy who did Irishman. And as good as the Irishman look, I would have a similar complaint that the pacing of that kind of ruined some of the things that he had done. But he's also the same guy who did Wolf of Wall Street, and nobody complains about the pacing of that. So now you have like a thing where but he's good at getting some crazy shot. If you ever saw that movie with Liam Neeson, Andrew Garfield, Silence, if you ever saw that, he did that as well. And that movie, I still believe, is one of the most beautifully shot movies ever, actually, if we really want to get down into the nitty gritty. But the pacing of that movie is very similar throughout the entirety of it all. And although it's slow, you recognize that it's slow. And so you're not really bothered. But here, there are some points where it does slow down. And you kind of wonder for what reason. You understand why, but you do wonder, like, all right, well, where does this go, or where does this lead? Especially when Lily Gladstone is gone, because now, and that's where it gets kind of interesting. And I think that's where some of the biggest criticisms come, when it's like, when the Osage tribe is there, there's a level of interest that's very, very high. When it's Robert De Niro talking and kind of manipulating Ernest, that's also a very high. I think during other parts of the movie, it's not as high, not as fleshed out as those two situations. And even those two situations could have been more fleshed out. So I think that's where you start to get a little bit of disconnect. I think something like Oppenheimer did it a little bit better when they were kind of switching from the experiment of getting there and the trial. And I think they were able to kind of match those tones a little bit better. I don't know if it works as well with like the FBI getting involved and everything along those lines. The performances are not bad. It's not a situation where it's like, oh my goodness, it's bad because of the performances. It's just, you do recognize that there are some length issues. But again, it's also, it's one of those weird paradox situations where it's like, you can understand it. You're not necessarily hateful of it, but you also kind of wish it was a little bit shorter, tighter.
I agree with you. And I feel like the first two acts, I thought the pacing was fine. And I think it's the third act for me. It's like, once you hit that 2 hour mark, I think that last hour and a half, because it is 3.5 hours, I think it didn't, the back and forth with Ernest going to prison and then not going to prison. And then there were like just a lot of other things that were going on that I think didn't need to be shown necessarily, like, or at least tightened up a lot more. And I think that that's where the issue starts to get for me with the pacing. So I completely agree with you guys on that one, for sure. So I think that The main thing one of the main things that I wanted to address was the end. And when I was talking earlier just now about the pacing, I was not talking about this specific part because I know this is probably a very controversial way to end a movie, and I'm sure it's divisive on how audience received it. I personally did love the choice of explaining what happened as a radio show, because normally you get the titles come on the screen and explains what everything that happened. And it made a lot of sense when I saw that Scorsese did model the pacing or even ideas based off of Beau is Afraid and Midsommar, Ari Aster's films. And the ending of Beau is Afraid is very meta in a sense where it leaves you where you're watching a stadium where people just get up while the credits go. And it's like, just like you would be in a movie theater. To me, the radio show had elements of that. And I really felt that, as they're explaining what's happening, yes, this is kind of that glorification of, murder and what everyone talks about when you see like the Netflix documentaries and stuff like that. And I feel like that was kind of a commentary on that. But I really loved the fact that when it got to what happened to Molly, that Scorsese was the one that came up to speak about it, because I felt like it really came off of how important this story was for him to tell. I know that he had met with the Osage people for months and months and months, and really tried to be as culturally accurate and respectful as he could. And that part just really got to me. And I remember after the film was over, no one feels good after that movie, but it wasn't like you're getting teary-eyed throughout the movie or anything like that. But once I got into the hallway, I really couldn't speak. And then I started walking and I started talking to my boyfriend about the film, and I just started crying because it was like you're holding in so much that you saw the entire film of what happened to these people. And then it really just hits you. And I think that Scorsese coming out and being like, this is my film, I want to present it to you all. This is what matters. And we need to see these stories because the school system is not doing that. So, I learned about the Tulsa Massacre on the Watchmen series on HBO for the first time. So, clearly it's important for these stories to be told. And I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on the end and how it was done.
So this is what's interesting. We'll never see this again, in my opinion. There'll never be a director that can do this because the things that are good about this film is what you said. It's made as a story that needs to be told that he wanted to tell, a true story. But in terms of, did they make this where it would make a ton of money? No, it's not going to. And I wouldn't say it deserves to, in terms of just it doesn't think about the audience. Even the concept of the intermission thing. If you cared about the audience, this would be a movie where you'd really consider it, or you'd edit it to where you get to the ending better. I like the ending with the radio part, by the way. I do agree with that. I think that third act, you said it, it's too long. The third act is a fumble, in my opinion. The ending is fine, like the very end, but they need to get there faster. Now, that being said, I love that this is Scorsese saying, I'm doing what I want to do. And as opposed to The Irishman, which I really just don't like, where it's another, I hate to say it, it's another fictional mob movie, and we've seen better ones.
Yeah.
We've seen better ones with the people, with the same cast, same director. We've seen better ones. This movie isn't like that. This movie's not bad. It has some faults, but the faults I can live with because I knew what I was getting into. I like Scorsese, this is what he does. He does his storytelling, but at least with this story, you could tell he cared a little more. This was important to him to do it the way he thought it should be done, I guess.
This movie is better than Oppenheimer at creating an uncomfortable situation. Oppenheimer tried to create an uncomfortable situation, particularly towards the end, by kind of showcasing you remember he was starting to have the visions and the thoughts of actually what just happened here. And, the room would kind of shake and suddenly people would be turned into skeletons and dust and ash. And he'd had that throughout the end, but it doesn't really make you feel uncomfortable because in some parts, not maybe intentionally or maybe intentionally, Oppenheimer, we see it through the eyes of American public at that time. They believe him to be a hero. Whereas here, they showcase very, very clearly and distinctly how uncomfortable a lot of these situations are, where you're not looking at anybody as right or wrong or anything. You're looking at this as a complete complicated matter where Molly is literally kind of in the center of it, having believed something, even though she was told not to believe that very thing. And I think it's captivating when you can have something like that and allow people to feel. And I think feeling is good in movies. And not that people didn't for Oppenheimer, not that they might not for Napoleon or will or won't, but it's just one of those where I think this movie here and movies that are like that that convey that kind of feeling are necessary. And that's one of the reasons why, like, yeah, it has its faults, but I'll never really complain about it because of the fact that it is a story that needs to be told. But yeah, it's I can't ever really put anything on getting all of it out. And at the end of the day, if Scorsese thought that he needed to do the time that he needed to have to get it out, then that's what he needed to do. And I think that's okay. Whether we have a problem with it or not, or faults or not. Some people will, some people won't, but I think that's okay if you want to get that story out.
Yeah, and I kind of love how with the deaths specifically, when you see the Osage members being murdered, it was very gangster like. It is very cold and calculated. You know, with
Yeah.
both Henry, getting him super drunk. They did the same thing to Anna, Molly's sister, and it's just like boom, that's it. Like no one cares, and it's like they built up this fake friendship with them, or even a marriage with Anna, and then it's just like, oh, they're done. You know, they're just commodities at that point, just to get closer to the money. And it's interesting too, like even in the beginning of the film, there's that scene where Molly is trying to ask for more money, because all the money was regulated and you could only get a certain amount at a certain amount of time. It's interesting because native cultures are actually a matriarchy and the women are actually in charge of the finances. So now she's being put in a position where it's her money, but she's being questioned constantly about like what she's using it for. And I found all that stuff really interesting. I want to bring it just to end things. I have to just bring in Jesse Plemons real quick, who played the FBI agent. I love him. I thought that scene in the doorway where he's like talking to Ernest and is like questioning him, and Leo is just playing super dumb and like, well, what are you here for? Like, no, he's like, well, I told you what I'm here for. And it's like that back and forth. I think Jesse Plemons has such a strong presence as well, just like, you know, kind of like with Molly, not as much, but I think he's always very that stoic quietness, but has a huge presence. And I loved him in Power of the Dog, and that is a very quiet performance. But it's the same type of thing. And then the other side of the coin is Brendan Fraser, because his performance is very divisive. I don't know if you guys liked it. I thought his performance was really overacting, and I felt like it was kind of a shame to see that after he won the Oscar for Best Actor. So I thought it was just a little too much. But Scorsese says he loves it, but a lot of people kind of have criticisms about that. What do you guys think about both of Jesse Plemons and Brendan Fraser?
I think expectation works against Brendan in this movie because he did just come off of The Whale. So it was like, oh, here we go. But if we had seen him in Batgirl, I think we would have been like, oh, okay, this is back to normal. I love Brendan Fraser, but I think I had really high expectations for this movie. That's part of the problem. When I came into this year, early in the year, we talked about it. I thought that this movie was going to be the best movie of the year, win Best Picture. It seemed like a lock for me. The story, Scorsese, the cast was, everybody was just ridiculous. And then I didn't have high hopes for Oppenheimer. And then I saw Oppenheimer and was like, oh my gosh, this is one of my favorite movies I've ever seen in my entire life. And when I saw this movie, I think my expectations got the best of me. I expected this to be Scorsese's best film. I wouldn't say it's his best film. I wouldn't even say, I don't even know if I put it in top 3, to be honest. That's not saying the film's bad, but for Scorsese, I don't know if it's his best. I think it's an important film. I think it's a film that you watch one time and you get the story and it's like, you feel that but it's not a rewatch type movie, which is fine. It's not, maybe not meant to be that, but yeah, the acting across the board, I could even argue that as good as De Niro was, I expected more from everyone. I'm not saying you could get more. He did great. But like there was just such expectations, even from Leo, because every time I expect Leo, I expect it to be Best Actor award. And that's not a fair expectation. That's me. But this movie didn't live up to the hype of what my mind, and maybe that's me, and Scorsese sets the tone. I don't know. I'm a little let down across the board, to be honest.
I liked I like Jesse Plemons. I didn't like Brendan Fraser as much, but neither one of them were actually my favorite supporting characters in this film. I very much liked I think it's Kara. I forget the last name. The woman who played Molly's sister. I thought
Yeah.
that was a really good performance. John Lithgow, I thought was a pretty good. Not in the movie as much, but like I thought that was a pretty good performance. He
Yeah.
was the prosecutor. And the mother, I thought that was,
Ugh.
and now to be fair with the mother, a lot of it does kind of add with the cinematography that she is given. But ironically, those two weren't. Jesse Plemons does a great job. I think he does a much better job than Brendan Fraser. But yeah, I think there was just some really smaller but really strong performances throughout, and I think that's what kind of helps push the film up over the edge a bit. And that's why I think there's some complaints of particularly the Osage being a little bit underwritten because those performances were so well done that you're like, could we have gotten a little bit more? And that's where that might be one of the big things with the film. But ultimately, I think it's good that they were able to get those kinds of performances out of so many people in the cast.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I'm not saying that Jesse Plemons should get nominated for Best Supporting Actor. I don't think that that's that type of role at all. And I do agree that, yes, Anna, Molly's sister, Molly's mother, and as well as Henry, I think those three
Yeah.
supporting performances were outstanding. Yeah, and I think everyone seemed like on set that they all were just really they knew how important the film was. They all, respected each other. They all got along, and it was actually during the pandemic. They actually were all wearing masks, and you have like Scorsese, who's like 80 years old, who has asthma, and it's like, oh, okay, well, let's just be really careful around here. And they did it. They made it in a really at the time it was early on, and it was a dangerous place to be in. But everyone was isolated, and they came together. I think it was like a pretty long shoot too. I think it was like 180 days or 160 days or something like that. And then they just did some reshoots with some of the Osage tribe. But yes, I think overall, I think it's just again, it's the beginning of Oscar season where we're going to get some really great films coming out, real filmmaking, and I feel like it's great to have these conversations. We don't always have to agree on things. That's what these movies are for. If we all agreed on everything, it would be really boring, and everyone has different tastes and everything's subjective. And I think we do all agree that it definitely could have been a little bit shorter, especially in the third act for sure. I don't know if there's anything else you gentlemen want to add to this discussion about the film. Any final words? No?
I think one thing that will be interesting is to see what is favored or what is wanted more when going up against Oppenheimer for like the general public and the award-ish voting panel, if you will. I'm curious because they're not similar movies by any stretch of the margin. They both tell important stories, but they tell important stories in different ways. And I'm curious as to, because Oppenheimer, unfortunately, and like Bone Bridger, you said, it's like two opposite ends of the spectrum, right? Like Oppenheimer near $1 billion, might make $1 billion with the re-release. And I don't even know if this has gotten past 100, right?
I think it just hit 100, but it's going to really slow down.
Right. But yet you could make the case this is the much more important story to tell. And so I'm just kind of curious how that will affect things moving forward. And hopefully as it gets pushed to Apple TV, more people watch, because it is something that at the very least, story-wise, yes, it's tough, but at least there's a good movie behind it.
Yeah, and they should do it in high schools. You take it over 3 days, in your history class and show it like that. I think that would be fantastic. I really do. I remember
that's asking a lot.
I know.
That's asking a lot of the American school system.
Yeah. That's true. Well, thank you both so much again for joining me today. And for everyone that's watching the video, the description for both of their channels, I'm so sorry, I will say that. The link for both of their channels will be in the description down below. And thanks for stopping by.